She touched my arm and leaned in close, the way people do when they don't want anyone else to hear. Her voice was barely a breath against my ear. "Don't get on that elevator," she said. "Please, I need you to trust me right now." I looked at her. A hospital housekeeper. Gray uniform, cart with a mop handle sticking up at an angle, a lanyard with a photo ID I couldn't read from where I was standing. She was maybe 40 years old, with tired eyes, and the kind of face that belongs to someone who has seen a great deal and chosen not to say much about it. I had 30 seconds to decide. The elevator doors were open. My daughter-in-law, Colleen, was already inside, holding the button, smiling at me with that particular smile she had developed over the past 2 years, the one that was patient the way a trap is patient. I stepped back. I said I'd take the stairs. Bad knee, I told them. Needed to walk it out. Colleen's smile flickered. Just for a moment. Then the doors closed. I want to tell you that I knew something was wrong that afternoon. I want to say my instincts spoke to me and I listened. But the truth is that for almost 3 years before that day, I had refused to hear a single thing my instincts were trying to tell me. My name is Gerald Morrow. I am 68 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer for the county of Maricopa, Arizona, and I retired with a pension, a paid-off house in Scottsdale, and enough in savings to live quietly and well for whatever years God chooses to give me. My wife Patricia passed away 4 years ago, pancreatic cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end. I held her hand at the last moment, and I have thought about that moment every single day since. Grief does something to a person that nobody warns you about adequately. It doesn't just make you sad. It makes you soft in places that used to be firm. It makes you want to believe the best of people because the alternative that you are truly alone is more than you can sit with quietly. I know that now. I did not know it when my son Marcus came back into my life. Marcus was 41 when he reappeared. We had not been close for years, not since his mid-30s when he made a series of decisions I disagreed with and responded to my disagreement by simply removing himself. I was not invited to his wedding. I learned about it from a cousin. I sent a gift and received no acknowledgement. That was the kind of relationship we had, or didn't have. Then Patricia died, and Marcus called. He was kind on the phone, genuinely kind, or so it seemed. He said the right things about his mother, asked the right questions about how I was managing, suggested we try to rebuild something before more time slipped away. He flew out to Scottsdale with Colleen, and they stayed for a long weekend, and I cooked the way I used to cook when the house was full, and it felt, for the first time in 14 months, like something approaching normal. I should have asked myself why. I should have asked what had changed, and why now, and what they wanted. But I was lonely, friends, and loneliness is its own kind of hunger. It will make you eat things that are not good for you just to stop the hollow feeling. Over the following year, Marcus and Colleen visited often. They helped around the house. Colleen took over my medical appointments, just scheduling them, she said, because I kept forgetting and she wanted to make sure I was taken care of. Marcus started handling some of my finances. Just the complicated parts, he said. The stuff that required attention I couldn't easily give from a distance. I had, at various points, granted him access to accounts. Signed documents he put in front of me. I reviewed them, or I thought I did. I was trusting. There is a particular cruelty in being deceived by your own child. Not because the deception is more painful than other kinds, though it is, but because it works precisely by turning your love against you. Every piece of trust I extended was a tool in their hands. That Tuesday, I was at Scottsdale Memorial for a routine follow-up. Nothing dramatic, a post-procedure check on a cardiac stent I'd had placed 8 months earlier. Marcus couldn't come, he said. Work. Colleen offered to take me, and I accepted. The appointment went fine. Clean numbers, doctor pleased. Colleen was pleasant in the waiting room, bought me a coffee from the cart, chatted with the receptionist. We were heading to the parking garage. She pressed the elevator button and held it for me, and that is when the housekeeper appeared from the side hallway pushing her cart. That is when she touched my arm. I took the stairs. My knee did ache, it wasn't entirely a lie. I met Colleen at the car and she seemed normal, maybe a degree or two quieter than usual, and she drove me home and said goodbye from the driveway, and I stood in my kitchen after she left and tried to understand what had just happened. I almost talked myself out of it. I nearly decided the woman had mistaken me for someone else, or had some kind of episode, or that I had misheard her. I was standing at the kitchen sink, running cold water over my wrists the way Patricia used to when she wanted to calm down, and I heard my wife's voice as clearly as if she were standing behind me. Ask the question, Gerald. You've always been afraid to ask the question. I sat down at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, and I started asking questions. I pulled out the file I kept of documents Marcus had given me to sign over the past 2 years. I had a system. I was an engineer for 3 decades, and old habits don't leave you. I kept copies of everything in a green accordion folder in the bottom drawer of my desk. I sat with that folder for 4 hours. The first thing I found was an amendment to my will that I did not remember signing. My recollection of the conversation Marcus and I had about the will was that we discussed updating the beneficiary designations on my retirement accounts, not changing the will itself. The amendment before me redirected the bulk of my estate away from the charitable remainder trust. Patricia and I had established together a fund designated for a children's literacy organization she had cared deeply about, and into a structure that named Marcus and Colleen as sole beneficiaries. My granddaughter Iris, Marcus's own daughter from his first relationship, the child I had put money aside for since she was born, was not mentioned. The second thing I found was a power of attorney document. Broad, very broad, covering financial decisions, property transactions, and medical decisions in the event of incapacitation. My signature was on it. I did not remember signing it. I am not a man who forgets signing a power of attorney. I sat with that for a long time. Then I did something I should have done 18 months earlier. I called my attorney. Not the one Marcus had introduced me to when he started handling my finances. My own attorney, a woman named Sandra Fitch, I had used for estate planning when Patricia was first diagnosed and who I had let slide in the years since. I called her personal cell, which I still had. It was 7 in the evening and she answered. I told her what I had. I described the documents. I read her the language of the power of attorney over the phone while she listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, Gerald, don't sign anything else. Don't make any transfers. And I need to see those documents tomorrow morning, first thing. I told her there was something else I needed to tell her first. I told her about the woman in the hospital hallway. Sandra was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Do you know her name? I did not. The next morning I drove to the hospital before my appointment with Sandra. I went to the housekeeping office and I described the woman gray uniform, tired eyes, the cart, the lanyard. A supervisor listened and typed something into a computer and looked up at me and said, That's Darlene Webb. She works the 4th floor, cardiac wing. I asked if I could speak with her. Darlene Webb was a small, contained woman who initially had nothing to say to me. She looked at me the way people look when they are calculating what they can afford. I told her I wasn't there to cause trouble. I told her I just needed to understand what she had seen. She took me to a small break room at the end of the hallway. She poured herself a coffee she didn't drink. She looked at her hands. She told me that for the past several months, she had worked the cardiac floor on Tuesdays. She had seen me come through with my daughter-in-law a number of times. She had noticed them, Colleen. She meant notice the way she spoke to the staff, the questions she asked, medical questions, specific ones, about cardiac events in elevators, about response times, about whether the hospital monitored the parking garage elevators on camera. 3 days before my appointment, Darlene had been restocking a supply closet near the consultation rooms when she heard Colleen on a phone call. The door was slightly open. Darlene told me she hadn't intended to listen, but Colleen's voice was sharp, not like it was in the hallways, and Darlene stopped moving. She heard enough. She heard a conversation about timing, about how it would be impossible to prove anything, about how the power of attorney would handle things if I were, and here Darlene paused and looked at her coffee cup, if I were no longer able to make decisions. Darlene had not told her supervisor. She'd been afraid she'd misunderstood or that it would become something that cost her her job. She had spent 3 days telling herself it was nothing, and then she had seen me walking toward that elevator. I thanked her. I thanked her the way you thank someone when ordinary words are not close to sufficient. I told her I would make sure she was not touched by any of what came next. Sandra Fitch met with me for 3 hours that morning. She had a colleague join us, a man named Arthur Reeves, who specialized in financial elder abuse cases, which was a phrase I had to sit with for a moment, because it had never once occurred to me that phrase could apply to my life. We went through every document in the green accordion folder. We identified 14 items that required immediate legal attention. 3 of them, Sandra said, showed evidence of forgery or fraudulent procurement. The will amendment, in particular, she believed I had signed a different document, and the pages had been switched. Sandra contacted the Scottsdale Police Department. An investigator named Torres came to her office that afternoon. I told him everything from the beginning and then told it again while he typed. He took the documents. He told me not to contact Marcus or Colleen, not to indicate anything had changed, and to call him immediately if either of them reached out. I drove home and sat in my backyard and looked at the saguaro Patricia and I had planted along the wall the year we bought the house. It was taller than me now. We had watched it grow together for 22 years. I had watched it grow alone for 4. I thought about Marcus at 9 years old, in the shallow end of the public pool in Mesa, asking me to watch him swim. Watch me, Dad, watch me. I had watched him. I had watched him every time he asked, and a good number of times he hadn't. I thought about where the distance between that boy and this situation had begun, and I could not find a clear starting point. It never started in one place. That's what I have come to understand. It was a slow chemical change, drop by drop, until the solution was unrecognizable. The investigation moved faster than I expected. Detective Torres and his unit worked with Sandra to build the case over the following 6 weeks. In that time, I behaved as normally as I could manage. I took Marcus's calls. I said I was fine. I said the appointment had gone well. I did not go back to the hospital. What they found in bank records, email threads, a shared document folder Marcus had not adequately secured was extensive. Over 22 months, Marcus and Colleen had transferred a total of $234,000 out of accounts I had given Marcus access to. They had done it incrementally, in amounts calibrated to avoid triggering automatic alerts, and distributed through 3 different institutions. They had forged my signature on the will amendment. Sandra's handwriting expert confirmed it conclusively. They had obtained the power of attorney by presenting me with a stack of routine account maintenance forms and burying the document in the middle. And there was the matter of the elevator. Colleen had researched cardiac events in people with recent stent placements. She had researched what physical exertion could cause. She had made specific inquiries to a contact someone Marcus knew from a prior business dealing about medications that could be administered without ready detection and that could increase cardiac risk under stress. Those email threads were recovered from a deleted folder. It was not a vague plan. It was not a passing thought. It was a plan. Marcus and Colleen were arrested on a Thursday morning. I was not present. I had asked not to be told the exact time because I was not sure I could sit in my house knowing it was happening and feel anything other than a grief I wasn't ready for yet. The charges against them were numerous. Financial elder abuse, fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and based on the documented research, the contact, the communications about timing, and the elevator attempted murder. The prosecutor's office took that charge seriously. Sandra told me they intended to pursue it fully. I want to be honest with you about what the weeks that followed felt like, because I think sometimes these stories skip over that part. It did not feel like justice, not at first. It felt like a loss. It felt like standing at a graveside for someone who had not actually died, which is its own particular kind of mourning. Marcus was my son. I could hold 2 things at once, the fact of what he had done and the fact of who he had been to me, and find that they did not cancel each other out. They simply both existed. That was harder than the anger, in some ways. I will tell you what helped. My granddaughter Iris was 23 years old and living in Tucson. I had sent her birthday cards and money for years, even during the silence. When the news broke in the family, and it did, the way these things always do, Iris called me. She called from a gas station parking lot in Tucson, crying in a way that made it clear she had been holding it in while she drove, and she told me she had always known something was wrong, but hadn't understood what, or had the standing to say so. She came to Scottsdale that weekend. She stayed for a week. We ate dinner every night at the table where her grandmother used to sit, and we talked about Patricia and about her life and about what she wanted to do with her degree and about nothing important at all. It was the most human I had felt in 4 years. Marcus and Colleen entered plea agreements rather than go to trial. I was told this was expected given the weight of evidence. The financial charges and fraud counts resulted in mandatory restitution, full repayment, which will follow them for the rest of their lives, and 5 years in state prison for Marcus, 4 for Colleen. The attempted murder conspiracy charge, which they contested, was ultimately included in the sentencing structure. The judge, when she delivered the sentence, said something I have thought about many times since. She said that the crime was not only against my finances or my physical safety, but against the specific trust that a child holds over a parent, which is a trust that cannot be manufactured or assumed, and which, once weaponized, causes a harm that no restitution schedule can fully address. 5 years. Real prison. Real consequences. I want you to hear that. Sandra handled the reversal of every fraudulent document. The will amendment was voided. The power of attorney was revoked. The charitable trust Patricia and I established was restored and fully funded. Iris was added to my estate in a way that reflects what I actually want my life's work to mean. And then there was the matter of Darlene Webb. I went back to the hospital on a Tuesday morning, which is her day on the cardiac floor. I brought flowers, which she told me later she almost didn't accept because she had a policy about patients giving gifts. I told her they weren't from a patient. I told her they were from a man who was alive because she made a decision to do the hard thing when it would have been far easier to push her cart down the hall and mind her own business. She cried a little, and then she straightened up immediately and looked slightly annoyed with herself for it, which told me a great deal about who she was. I had spoken with Sandra beforehand. There was a reward provision under Arizona's elder financial abuse statutes. Darlene qualified. The amount was not enormous, but it was real, and it was hers, and she accepted it after I explained what it was and where it came from. Beyond that, I wrote a letter to the hospital administration describing in precise terms what Darlene Webb had done and what it had cost her to do it, and what her willingness to act had prevented. I asked them to consider how they recognized employees of her caliber. A copy of that letter went to the local paper, which ran a small story. Darlene called me after the story ran and said she wished I hadn't done it because now everybody wanted to stop by her floor to meet her and she was getting behind on her rooms. I laughed at that. A real laugh, the kind that surprises you by arriving when you weren't expecting it. I want to tell you something, friends, that I have been sitting with since all of this ended. There is a moment in this story, in any story like this, that you can look back at and see was the pivot. For me, it was not the arrest or the sentencing or even the discovery of those documents in the green accordion folder. The pivot was a Tuesday afternoon in a hospital hallway, when a woman with a mop cart and tired eyes made the calculation that a stranger's life was worth the risk of being wrong. She didn't know me. She had nothing to gain. She had everything to lose, including her job, which she needed. She acted anyway. The people who should have protected me had made me their target. The person who had no obligation to me whatsoever became my protection. I don't know what to do with that except to hold it carefully and let it change how I move through the world. I am slower to assume that a title or a relationship guarantees good intention. I am quicker to notice the people in the background, the people who are not supposed to matter to the story, and to understand that sometimes they are the whole story. My knee still aches on cold mornings. The saguaro in the backyard is still growing. Iris calls every Sunday now, which is a thing I did not know I was missing until I had it. I am 68 years old, and I am learning, late but not too late, that the people who love you are not always the ones you expect, and the ones you expect are not always the ones who do. I'll see you next time, friends. Take care of each other out there.